It is history's greatest paradox. The mighty Roman Empire turned to dust. The Third Reich crumbled to ash. Yet against all logic, the most fragile objects on earth have survived 2,000 years of fire and war. A blood-stained cloth, a splinter of wood, a dried thorn. How is this possible? These are not just ancient artifacts. They are silent witnesses. And today, for the first time, modern forensic science has the power to unlock their secrets. We are about to decode the physical evidence of the Passion. 1. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. To step into this building is to step into the epicenter of history. The air here is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and ancient incense. The stone floor is worn smooth by the knees of millions of pilgrims who have journeyed here for 2,000 years. They come believing this is the exact spot of the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. But before you enter the darkness of the tomb to find the light, stop for a moment. Look up at the facade of the church. Above the heavy wooden doors, there is a window on the right, and leaning against that window is a simple cedar ladder. It looks completely ordinary. It looks as if a mason left it there this morning while going for a lunch break. But that ladder has not moved for nearly 300 years. It is known as the immovable ladder, and it is perhaps the most ironic object in Christendom. It hasn't stayed there because of a divine miracle, but because of a human tragedy. The church is shared by 6 different Christian denominations: Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Roman Catholic, and others. For centuries, the tension between them was so fierce that actual brawls would break out in the sanctuary. So in the 18th century, a strict agreement called the status quo was imposed. It meant that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be moved, repaired, or changed without the unanimous consent of all 6 groups. This created a psychological deadlock known as a rigid rule conflict. The ladder belongs to everyone, which means it belongs to no one. To move it 1 inch would require a consensus that has never existed. So the ladder sits there, frozen in time. It is a mirror reflecting a painful truth. The very place revered as the site of ultimate forgiveness is guarded by factions who cannot forgive each other enough to move a piece of wood. It is the ladder of imperfection. It reminds us that while God may have conquered death inside the tomb, humans outside have yet to conquer their own pride. The ladder stands as a silent question mark. But if we can look past the failures of the present and step inside, we must ask, how did we find this place to begin with? How do we know this isn't just a random cave in Jerusalem? To answer that, we must go back to the 4th century, to a woman who refused to take no for an answer. But how do we know any of this is real? How do we know the tomb, the cross, or the nails aren't just medieval inventions? To answer that, we must travel back to the 4th century, to the woman who started it all, Empress Helena. History often paints her as a devout, perhaps slightly naive, elderly woman. Skeptics love to dismiss her famous pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 326 AD as nothing more than a royal shopping spree. The argument goes like this. The emperor's wealthy mother arrives in town looking for souvenirs, and the locals, eager to please, simply sell her whatever she wants to see. You want a cross? Here is some old wood. You want a nail? Here is some rusty iron. It is a convenient theory, but it collapses when you look at the ground beneath her feet. When Helena arrived, Jerusalem as we know it did not exist. The Romans had obliterated it centuries earlier, renaming it Aelia Capitolina. They were determined to erase the memory of Christ entirely, and the specific site of Golgotha, the place of the skull, was not an open hill. It was gone. For 200 years, it had been buried beneath a massive stone platform supporting a pagan temple dedicated to the goddess Venus. Emperor Hadrian had built it there on purpose, sealing the Christian holy site under tons of marble and pagan statues to ensure it would never be worshipped again. Helena didn't go to a market to buy relics. She went to a construction site to wage war on history. She ordered a massive excavation. She commanded that the Temple of Venus be torn down, stone by stone. Her workers smashed through the pagan statues and dug through centuries of debris. It was a demolition project. They dug down, past the Roman layers, past the rubble of wars, until they hit the raw, living bedrock. And there, sealed beneath the foundations of the pagan temple, trapped like a time capsule since the 1st century. The earth yielded its secrets. They found a rock-cut tomb. They found a cistern, and thrown into an ancient well, preserved by the dry limestone environment, they found 3 wooden crosses. This wasn't a purchase, it was a recovery. The fact that these objects were found under a temple built to hide them is the strongest evidence of their authenticity. It proves that the early Christian community had preserved the exact location of the crucifixion with such intensity that the Romans felt they had to bury it a mountain of stone. Among the debris, Helena recovered objects that would become the central relics of Christendom. She found the true cross. She found the iron spikes, the holy nails that had pierced hands and feet. And she found the holy tunic of Trier, the seamless garment that soldiers cast lots for, just as the Gospels describe. She didn't find them because she was rich. She found them because she was willing to dig where no one else dared. But of all the discoveries that emerged from the dust of Jerusalem, there is one that science is still trying to explain, a linen cloth that tells a story not of wood and iron, but of light and radiation. But of all the objects that claim to have touched the body of Christ, one stands apart. It is controversial, it is haunting, and it is the most scientifically studied artifact in human history. 2. The Shroud of Turin. For centuries it was just a relic, a long yellowed linen cloth kept in a cathedral in Italy. To the naked eye, it looks like nothing more than a faint, blurry stain. But in 1898, an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia snapped a picture of it. And when he looked at the negative plate in his darkroom, he nearly dropped it in terror. The negative didn't show a blur. It showed a high-resolution, photographic image of a man who had been scourged, beaten, and crucified. The image on the plate was a perfect positive. That means the cloth itself is a negative. How could a medieval forger have created a photographic negative 500 years before photography was invented? The mystery deepens when we travel from Italy to Spain to the Cathedral of Oviedo. Here lies another cloth, the sudarium. Tradition says this small napkin covered Jesus' face immediately after death, while he was still on the cross, before he was wrapped in the shroud. Skeptics call it a coincidence, but forensics calls it a match. Scientists have analyzed the blood on both cloths. Both contain type AB blood, a rare type common in the Middle East, but scarce in medieval Europe. But it goes further. When forensic experts digitally overlaid the bloodstains of the sudarium onto the face of the shroud, the geometry was perfect. The wounds aligned, the nasal structure aligned. Mathematically, the odds of 2 random artistic forgeries matching this perfectly are almost 0. These 2 linens covered the same bleeding head, but there is an elephant in the room, a scientific stumbling block that has made believers doubt and skeptics cheer. In 1988, 3 prestigious laboratories performed carbon-14, dating on a corner of the shroud. The result was a bombshell. The flax was harvested between 1260 and 1390. The world declared it a medieval fake. Case closed. Or was it? Today, NASA scientists and physicists are scratching their heads again. Why? Because the 1988 test ignored a critical variable, radiological contamination. Here is the paradox. If the carbon-14 date is accurate, then the image must be a painting. But we know it is not a painting. There is no pigment, no brushstrokes, no chemical dye. The image is a scorch, a dehydration of the flax fibers that penetrates only 1/100th of a millimeter deep. So if it's not a painting, and if it covered a real body, why does the carbon dating say it's young? Consider this hypothesis, one that bridges physics and theology. If the resurrection was a literal event, a singularity where matter transformed into a new state, it would have released a burst of neutron radiation. Imagine a flash of energy more powerful than a nuclear reactor, but lasting only a fraction of a second. This event horizon would not only scorch the image onto the cloth like an X-ray, it would flood the linen with neutrons. This is where the science gets mind-blowing. Neutron bombardment creates new isotopes in linen. It enriches the carbon-14 content. In simple terms, this radiation would reset the clock, making the cloth appear centuries younger than it actually is. The carbon-14 result wasn't a machine error. It was a witness to an anomaly. The cloth wasn't faked in the Middle Ages. It was subjected to a burst of energy that physics cannot replicate. We are left with a chilling realization. We are not looking at a piece of art. We are looking at the scorch marks of an explosion, a snapshot of the exact millisecond when death was violently conquered by life. But if the shroud proves the resurrection, the next object proves the brutality of the death that preceded it. To understand it, we must look not at the skin, but at the heart. If the Shroud of Turin captures the image of the skin, the next object reveals the ruin of the heart. 10. The Lance of Longinus. It was a standard Roman weapon, an iron tip designed to kill efficiently. On that dark Friday at Golgotha, the soldiers were ordered to break the legs of the crucified men to hasten their deaths. But when they came to Jesus, he was already still. To verify he was gone, a centurion named Longinus didn't break his bones. He thrust his spear into Jesus' side, and in that moment, the Gospel of John records a detail that has baffled readers for 2 millennia. Immediately blood and water flowed out. For centuries, theologians treated this as pure symbolism. The water represented baptism, the blood represented the Eucharist. It was a spiritual metaphor, but modern medicine tells a different, far more visceral story. It is the anatomy of agony. Consider the physiology of crucifixion. Before he even reached the cross, Jesus had endured a brutal scourging. He was in a state of critical dehydration and massive blood loss. Doctors call this hypovolemic shock. As the body fights to survive, the heart races, beating faster and faster to pump what little blood remains. This extreme physical stress causes a clear, serum-like fluid to accumulate around the lungs and the heart. In medical terms, this is pleural and pericardial effusion. The water John saw wasn't a miracle. It was serum. When the spear pierced the chest cavity, it punctured the pericardium, the sac surrounding the heart, releasing this buildup of clear fluid, followed immediately by the heavy red blood from the heart itself. This detail changes everything. It means that by the time the spear struck, Jesus had likely already suffered a cardiac rupture. His heart had literally failed under the weight of the trauma. A writer in the 1st century could not have known about pericardial effusion. They didn't understand the circulation of the blood, let alone the pathology of shock. To invent this detail would require medical knowledge that wouldn't exist for another 1,600 years. The lance doesn't just prove he died. It proves he died of a broken heart. But while the lance was a weapon of an empire, the next object was the obsession of a dictator. From the hill of Golgotha, we must now descend into the darkness of the 20th century, where the search for relics turned into a hunt for power. While the lance pierced the heart of God, the next object became the obsession of men who wanted to be God. 4. The Holy Grail. We all know the legends: King Arthur, the Knights Templar, Indiana Jones. We picture a golden chalice encrusted with rubies, a magical object that grants eternal youth. But in the 1930s, the search for the Grail stopped being a myth and became a military operation. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi high command were obsessed with the occult. To them, these relics were not symbols of faith. They were batteries of cosmic energy. They didn't want the Grail to wash away their sins. They wanted it to make the Third Reich invincible. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, personally traveled to the Montserrat Abbey in Spain in 1940. He wasn't there to pray. He was there to hunt. He was convinced the Grail was hidden in the jagged mountains. He scoured the ancient libraries, interrogated the monks, and searched the caves. It plays out like a thriller, but the psychology behind it is terrifying. Why would a regime built on hatred seek the cup of a man who preached love? Because they believed in the insight of power. They thought that whoever held the cup held the keys to history. But they made a fatal mistake. They were looking for a weapon. The actual object, believed by archaeologists to be the holy chalice kept today in Valencia Cathedral, is shocking in its simplicity. It is not a jewel-studded goblet. The original cup is just the upper bowl, a simple, dark agate vessel from the 1st century. It is humble. It is small. It is the cup of a carpenter, not a king. Here lies the ultimate irony of history. The Nazis sought a talisman of domination. But the cup was never about power over others. It was about the sacrifice of self. Hitler never found it. His 1,000-year Reich crumbled into ash in just 12 years. The tyrants fell, but the humble cup survived. But survival is never guaranteed. Sometimes the most precious things are the most flammable. And in 2019, the world watched in horror as one of these silent witnesses nearly vanished in a firestorm. April 15th, 2019. You remember where you were. You remember the images glued to your screen. The spire of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, engulfed in flames, snapping in two and crashing through the roof. The world watched in silence, weeping. But inside the inferno, a different story was unfolding. A story of desperate courage focused on one single object. 7. The Crown of Thorns. For 800 years, France had guarded this relic. King Louis IX had once walked barefoot through the streets of Paris carrying it, and he built the Sainte-Chapelle just to house it. It is not a circle of long thorns as you might see in medieval paintings, but a bundle of braided rushes, a helmet of pain that was pressed onto the head of Christ. But on that night in April, it was in the heart of the fire. As the roof disintegrated, a protocol of relics was activated. The Paris Fire Brigade faced a terrifying choice. The cathedral was collapsing. Molten lead was dripping from the ceiling like rain. The air was toxic, superheated smoke. Entering the nave was essentially a suicide mission. Yet they did not hesitate. A team of firefighters led by the brigade chaplain, Father Jean-Marc Fournier, formed a human chain. They surged into the smoke. They didn't run for the golden chalices. They didn't run for the priceless paintings or the silver candelabras. They ran for a circle of dry, brittle wood. Think about the paradox of that moment. Men equipped with modern technology, risking their lives in the 21st century to save an instrument of torture from the 1st century. Why? Why is a bundle of dry sticks worth more than human life? Because to them, and to millions of believers, that object is not just wood. It is the physical memory of the moment God allowed himself to be humiliated. The soldiers used it to mock him as a king, but the fire proved that his kingship survives everything. Father Fournier and his team broke the glass case. They grabbed the crown, and just minutes before the burning timbers crashed down onto the spot where it had lain, they emerged from the smoke. The crown was saved. When the news broke that the relic was safe, a cheer went up from the crowd kneeling on the banks of the Seine. It was a moment of collective relief that transcended religion. It was a signal that beauty and hope can survive the flames. The fire could burn the roof, but it could not burn the memory of the passion. The thorns survived, and they lead us to the final realization. We have looked at the tomb, the cross, the blood, and the thorns. But why do we keep them? Why do we, in our modern digital age, still cling to these physical things? The answer lies in something you probably carry in your pocket right now. But the list isn't quite finished. There is one object that predates them all. It is the holiest object in the Old Testament, lost for thousands of years, yet promising to return at the end of time. The Ark of the Covenant. Explorers have searched for it in the deserts of Ethiopia and the tunnels beneath Jerusalem. But the Bible offers a different map. The book of Revelation foretells that the Ark will be seen again, not by an archaeologist in a cave, but by all humanity in the heavens. It is not a lost treasure, it is a waiting promise. And this brings us to the final, uncomfortable question. The question that hangs over this entire journey. Why do we care? Why do we spend millions of dollars to protect old wood and stained cloth? Why do pilgrims crawl on their knees to touch cold stone? Is it superstition? Is it, as some critics claim, idolatry? To understand the answer, you don't need a theology degree. You just need to open your wallet. Inside, you probably keep a photograph. Maybe it is a picture of a parent who has passed away or a child who is far from home. When you take that photo out and look at it, when you touch the face on the paper, are you worshiping the ink? Do you love the chemical gloss of the photograph? Of course not. The paper has no power, but it has value. It is a bridge. It connects your heart across time and space to the person you love. It proves that they were real, that they held you, that they existed. These relics are no different. They are humanity's photographs. They are the physical snapshots of the moment the creator of the universe stepped into our timeline. They are the macros of history, the wood he carried, the thorns that pierced him, the linen that wrapped him. They are not magic wands. They are evidence. They remind us that the gospel isn't a fairy tale. It involved real nails, real sweat, and real blood. When a pilgrim kneels before the true cross, they are not worshiping a piece of timber. They are kneeling before the love that bled upon it to save them. The objects are fragile. They can burn. They can decay. But the story they tell is the only thing that lasts forever. In the end, we are left with a powerful truth. We often fear that science will strip away the mystery of faith. But these 10 silent witnesses tell a different story. They show us that science does not silence the past. It illuminates it. From the radioactive scorch on a linen cloth to the anatomical precision of a spear wound, the evidence suggests that the story of the Passion was not a myth. It was a physical event. It happened in our world, leaving scars that 2,000 years cannot heal. Whether you are a devout believer or a curious skeptic, these objects invite you to look closer, to see not just relics but the tangible proof of a love that conquered death. If this journey has given you a new perspective on history, share this video and let us know in the comments, which of these witnesses surprised you the most? The evidence has been presented. The verdict is now yours.